The panel today is part of our Community Voices program, which is a series of virtual encounters designed to inspire, inform, and bring our communities together. We are really excited to have all of you here, our moderator and our speakers. So our moderator today is Marcus Brown. Marcus is a native of New Orleans. He's a sculptor, painter, inventor, musician, and educator. Brown holds an MED from Portland State University and BFA from Kansas City Institute of Art in Missouri. His work is expansive and includes national and international exhibits and performances in New York City, Berlin, Germany, and Krakow, Poland, the Otitgbe Museum of Southern Art, McKenna Art Gallery, and the New Orleans Museum of Art, to name a few. Brown developed a form of painting called electrosonic painting, in which the artist paints with sound data producing instruments. He has performed with his invention in several venues, locally and nationally. In addition to his performance art, Brown has exhibited with artists such as Andy Warhol, Chris Burden, Hannah Wilke, and others around the world. Brown's latest project is a decentralized memorial to slavery in the United States called Slavery Trails. Slavery is a musically interactive augmented reality, AR, sculpture installation series based on slave ships and enslaved people. Marcus is actually one of our 2022 Innovator Award recipients. So that is a little bit about Marcus. Our panelists today, we have Otitgbe. Eto is interested in recovering buried narratives and giving form to the unseen. He is a polymedia artist whose interdisciplinary practice includes sculpture, performance, installation, and public art. His public art intersects history, community, and biophilic design by using parametric modeling and generative design to transform historical and cultural references into biomorphic forms and patterns that reference nature. Eto's public works include temporary installations in Socrates Sculpture Park and Randall's Island Park. His current large-scale public commissions include Peaceful Journey in Mount Vernon, New York, Cascode in Philadelphia, PA in 2024, and Emanative in Harlem, New York, as well as Passing Point in Alexandria, Virginia. And I should say, for full bios, I will give you every artist's website so you can read more about them. Our other panelist today is Jefferson Pinder. Jefferson's work provokes commentary about race and struggle, focusing primarily with neon found objects and video. Pinder investigates identity through the most dynamic circumstances and materials. His work has been featured in numerous group and solo shows, including exhibitions at the Studio Museum in Harlem, the Wadsworth Atheneum Museum of Art in Hartford, Connecticut, Showroom Mama in Rotterdam, Netherlands, the Phillips Collection, and the National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C. Pinder's work was featured in the 2016 Shanghai Biennale and at the Smithsonian Museum of African American History and Culture. In 2016, he was awarded a United States Artist Joyce Fellowship Award in the field of performance and was a 2017 John S. Guggenheim Fellowship. This past summer, Jefferson was a 2022 Smithsonian Artist Residency Fellow and a MacDowell Fellow recipient. And we do have one other panelist. I'm not sure if they'll be joining us today, but it is Sheleen P. Jones. So with that, you can all stop listening to me talk, and I will let Marcus take it away.
All right, hi everybody. Thanks for coming today. So today, the discussion, I thought about this as a subject that I guess is probably close to my experiences, and I wanted to kind of find out with some other artists, their experiences and their thoughts and their opinions about this. The purpose of this discussion is to explore the challenges that Black artists and other artists of color face in higher education and in art opportunities. Some of the questions that we're going to be asking are around what actions do we think can provide more access to art education? And then how equitable is higher arts education, and how does that education shape the dynamics of the professional art world. One of the reasons I brought this up is basically because right now, in higher education and in the professional art world, um, people who are from my background are a very, very small minority of a minority. And I think recent studies have shown that's kind of the truth in our particular subjects. And so, without further ado, I thought I would bring this to the table for everybody to discuss. So I believe almost everybody is an educator that's actually on the panel today. And so I was going to start with the first question, which is how equitable is the access to higher arts education in your particular view? And what's been your experience? I guess I'll just start with whoever wants to start first, or just kind of share their.
Guess I could go first. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm at Otitgbe. Currently, I'm an assistant professor in visual art at Brooklyn College. So I kind of can address this question from two perspectives. One, thinking back to my days, when I was pursuing my MFA. And then many years later, fast forward to today, where I'm an educator. I'm head of the sculpture area here at Brooklyn College, a small kind of scrappy city college, but also head of the MFA program. So I kind of have a broad perspective on what's happening, at least with students in this folks in this ecosystem here in New York. Is it equitable? I don't think so. I think what we understand is that there are a lot of barriers to entry to any higher education program that include finances and also time. And even if the playing field, let's say, was leveled so that maybe there was a tuition-free education, still not every student has the luxury of being a full-time student or even part-time students. What we see from the report, for example, that you shared with us panelists, Marcus, and I hope the folks who are participating on this call get to see this report as well, because it sheds some light on the situation, is that even if that one barrier of many is removed, there are still a lot of folks who may not feel safe in some of these institutions, or they have other responsibilities that are pretty serious, like caretaking and or providing for a family. So the idea of equity is a constantly moving one, but right now the situation, from my perspective, is not equitable.
Thank you very much. That was very informative. Thank you. Jefferson, maybe some.
I just kind of dovetail a little bit on that. I'm thinking about equity and how you begin to assess that in academia in general, in particular with these groups of disenfranchised people. So no, I mean, from my heart, if I had to say right off the bat, no, I don't think it's equitable. I don't know. Actually, I don't even have an idea of how it could be built equitably in the fashion that it's currently built. I think we would have to break things down significantly. I mean, at least, and I think this is probably true for a lot of art schools, and not just mine. And I think it's a issue of higher ed broadly, but no, I don't think there's equity. But I think maybe the conversation is like, what does that mean? Because I imagine it could mean many things to different people, and especially in this context. So I guess that's where I'm going. It's like, how do we begin to define that?
And I wanted to ask specifically related to some of the stuff that you do at your institution. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your role there, because it is connected with this idea of trying to have some equity at your institution. Am I correct? Or don't you have one hat that you wear there that is,
You know,
am I,
I've worn multiple hats, probably just like a lot of people here. You know, from the moment I graduated from grad school, there was always some kind of special hat of responsibility I had to figure out. So, most recently, I was the interim dean of faculty here at the School of the Art Institute of
okay,
Chicago, and then after that, I was a director of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is, I think,
okay,
infinitely
that's what
more
I was thinking.
complex. You know, and I did that for 2 years. But you know, putting on these hats and trying to figure out, I mean, I think my biggest accomplishment, um, I think the director of DEI, is to convince Edmund that this was a position that needed to be done by someone other than faculty. Not that they couldn't have a faculty position, but putting the commitment on to somebody who was a professional who had been trained in DEI is very different than having an artist whose career, I mean, art is my thing, you know, performance is my thing. But I also understand how important these roles are. And a lot of times, part of the inequity is that faculty find themselves in positions where they're not armed or prepared to do jobs that are really crucially important for an institution.
Thank you very much for that. um, I can relate with having to wear the responsibility hat of trying to provide equity, even though it's really not your role. Um, um, Eto, I wanted to just follow up. Is there anything else you would like to add on to what we were talking about, as far as like what's been your experience part in higher education? I always find this fascinating to find out other people's kind of experiences. I know everybody has their own. I know mine was very difficult during my graduate years because I had Hurricane Katrina to contend with. But
Yeah, I really think what Jefferson said is important. Well, two things he touched on are really important. The fact that you know, having an artist and someone who also had a stake in an incentive and interest in the importance of DEI, for his institution to assign that role to someone of his background, I think is a really smart one, because I think that diversity, equity, and inclusion issues systemically affect all the institutions that we may be part of or trying to access. So it's really important to take a lens of specificity when approaching these institutions. Here at Brooklyn College, there's a couple faculty members. I can't remember what department they're from, but on our annual faculty day a couple years ago, they shared a study they did where they sort of shadowed the custodial staff and did so and collected narratives from them and things like that, and collected some really important data about how they feel about their jobs and how they're valued and different things of that nature. So and you know, and that could shift, you know, when the group of folks that you're collecting personal accounts from or faculty or administrators or staff. You know, here at Brooklyn College, we have a really diverse student body. Many of our office and administrative staff are people of color, but our faculty are not. The percentage of people of color in our faculty is almost, you know, worse than an opposite flip of percentages. So, you know, what's that about? We're situated in Flatbush, you know, at Flatbush Junction in Brooklyn, which is a predominantly, the immediate vicinity is predominantly Jewish and Caribbean neighborhoods, you know. So many of our students, I think a high percentage, somewhere around 70% of our students are from the different boroughs within Brooklyn. So, you know, does our faculty represent the diversity of our borough currently? No, it doesn't. You know, so I think, you know, so the second point Jefferson made about really, you know, thinking about institutional transformation is really important, because you know, how do we get there? Why is it important to get there? How can we all develop that value first, as we chart a course, so it's not just to you know, meet a certain metric or kind of numerical, but understanding how it's contributing towards our overall collective health and well-being, I think, is important.
Thank you so much for that. I mean, I think this is interesting to hear from. I think what's great about it, this conversation right now, is understanding the triangulation of the different communities that we're in. Um, in my particular institution, I'm the only person of color in the faculty, and I don't think that I think that's reflective of just kind of where the educational, like, it kind of is reflective of the conversation that we're having a little bit. I added in the chat to everybody the Lumina Foundation study, the study findings that Ito had talked about earlier. I sent this to all the panelists, and if anybody wants to look at that at some other time, I have it right in front of me, and it just talks about some of the many challenges that Ito actually opened up talking about how it talks about whether you're a caretaker, and how, like, how many students of color have to end up basically working a job or taking care of their family, and how that impacts them not being able to be like a full-time student. So, and that just leads to the next question. Like, were some of those trends that were presented in that Lumen Foundation article about Black learners, this specifically was geared towards like the data it's specifically about Black learners in higher education, and that's including associates and bachelor's degrees primarily. So I just want to say that. But did anybody notice any trends from that particular, like, study that can really, like, that you've seen in your, I guess, in your experience in your academia institutions?
Um, I guess if I was to kind of call it a trend that I saw, is something that some colleagues of mine refer to as invisible labor, right? You know, the fact that folks have to
Okay.
wear multiple hats outside of school. So I had the luxury of my undergrad and my first master's being a full-time student, living in the campus, living on campus, living in a bubble, you know, always being around, you know, an academic environment. But my situation changed a little bit after then, and you know, I was working, and so for my MFA, which was a pathway for me to get the job that I have now, I did a low residency program because I couldn't stop working, and that was really transformative for me. So you know, it's a bit of a luxury to be able to attend some of these institutions, or even be a full-time student at some of these institutions. I know in our MFA program here, we really encourage students to, you get a studio, which is, even in New York in general, it's hard to have an artist studio, and it's really expensive, but we give our students pretty decent studios, and they get larger the longer they stay here. And we really want them to move in there, spend all your time in there, you know, do whatever you want, you know, have fun. And but it's hard because, you know, we have even our student body is very diverse, not just by terms of ethnic background, but also age. So, you know, folks have families and things of that nature, young kids, and um, we even have a daycare on campus here, which one of
Oh,
my
wow.
children attends, you know, which is huge. I mean, I don't know if I'd be able to do what I'm doing now if I wasn't able to, you know, have my kids in childcare. So I think there are so many things that, and you know, it's going to be dependent on the community wherever the institution is housed, but really getting an understanding of the community's needs, before their needs in general, before their needs as students or members of that academic community, to see how the academic institution can perhaps overlap or make partnerships with community or civic organizations to help satisfy some of those needs.
Something that I'm, been thinking about also is how sometimes terminology is limiting and limiting our understanding of people and diversity. Like I know, teaching at Brooklyn College and we talk about Black, I mean, what Black are you talking about? And it's just there's so many, and equally so it's like one of the frustrations we have at my school is when an Asian American student will be grouped in with international students. It's like there's a whole bunch of different kinds of needs and diversity within these groups, and trying to figure out ways of serving all these communities, even being able to identify their needs, has been really difficult here in Chicago. Our school is an incredible institution that doesn't reflect the incredible city that it's even named after. So I think that what happens when 20% of your student body is of people of color, and then 80% is white. It's somehow it influences everything. And even I think in our institution, we don't have grades. It's all critique based. So a lot of the learning happens in a critique environment, and our students are sometimes frustrated that their work can't be, or students of color rather, are frustrated because their work can't be appropriately talked about because the faculty and students aren't up to speed to some of the things that they're having conversations about, like let's say blackface or something that may be culturally specific that everybody should know about. But it's amazing how many people don't know about these issues. So that, it's like, well, what do you do? Is there a class that all students have to take so that we can have a common understanding or a common knowledge? But I think that a lot of times these courses, there's a lot of gaps. So it's trying to figure out, like, what do our students need, and how can we respond to maybe institutional problems? And that usually is on the shoulders of faculty to have to deal with. These questions that students have. It's like, well, where is the diversity in the faculty ranks? Where's the diversity in the student ranks? But ultimately, we're left carrying the bag, and maybe this is be a good conversation for us to have today. Is how do we deal with these? Because I'm sure a lot of us have similar problems. But how do we then deal with a report that identifies Black students? But I'm trying to figure out, what does Black mean in context to this study? Does it mean African American, Caribbean American? And it's like the needs are different. I think anybody who's taught can tell you that there's differences in how kids learn by where they're from, their backgrounds. Right. And if we're grouping them all together, I think it's at a disservice. So how do we then get more specific with this information?
That's thank you very much for that. Yeah, that's a very good question. I believe the context of this study, the way that it's presented, it's what a lot of studies like this, you have to kind of generalize and start grouping people together. And I think with this particular study, it shows, this seems like a small study, to be honest with you. It's not like the number of students. So it's 12,015 students total, like as far as so just thinking about that alone, that's a very good question. Just thinking about what kind are you talking, like which different communities are you really addressing? The thing that I think is interesting also about that is what you just said, is that it is fascinating to kind of try to think about how do you have those conversations in an institution where part of the work is talking about your own experiences and then not having everybody up to speed on these things. so I think that's very, very, very interesting. Thank you both.
Yeah, if I could just chime in for a second, I think that's a
Yeah,
great question that Jefferson's asking because, especially in an arts program, we see that. And you're right, because students are bringing a lot of personal history, a lot of political, social, economic, and cultural context into conversations. And, sometimes they may not want to, give everyone a refresher on yeah, I don't know, Nigeria. I'm Nigerian American, so contemporary Nigerian politics, just so you can understand why I'm, naming my work a certain way or something. It's a lot, it's a lot of, again, that invisible labor. As a professor, one thing I started doing more recently, when I do studio crits and things like that, is I kind of spend the first few minutes of the conversation talking about, why are we here? What do we hope to achieve from this experience? Kind of just structuring what the interaction will be like to make sure that the student gets, what they want, but are also open to maybe expect some things that, they may not have been initially expecting. But at the same time, I want to understand, I want them to understand how I'm approaching the space, how are they approaching the space. One particular week they might be ready for a really kind of gut punching crit, whereas another week they don't want to hear it, they don't have the time or space for a lot of reasons, but maybe they do have some very specific formal questions or conceptual questions, or just need some references or something like that. So I think just being really open to kind of explore a conversation and what it means to do that is becoming increasingly important, because I think arts education is so fragile compared to perhaps what it was 10 or 15 or 20 years ago.
thank you so much for that. Yeah, that's a very interesting. Just thinking about this idea of critique and how personal it can be, really, with the student, with the student's own personal experiences and their whole personal, I guess, their personal journey in this. Thank you all very much for that. The next, moving along to the next question and bringing education into, I guess, into our professional world of a professional arts community. What does equity in higher art education, or how does equity in higher art education shape the professional art community? And one of my reasons for asking this is just thinking about this idea of what communities, looking at how people who've studied, I feel like all of us have gone to school and taken this art profession very seriously, and just thinking about that, how do you think equity is affecting that the art community in general? I'm gonna try to stick to the two minutes ish per piece.
Feel free to linger. If you like a
Okay,
question,
just
if we
making
like
sure.
a question, we can stay longer.
Okay, just checking. All right.
I guess for me, I see like the professional arts community as a pretty diverse one, and I'm not talking about the people yet. I'm talking about the opportunities. If you really think about it, of course, there's artist, there's art historian, there's curator, but there's a lot of technical jobs in the arts. There's conservation, preservation, installation, art handling. There's a lot of education-based jobs. There's finance jobs. There's a lot of different roles folks with an arts background can, occupy within the art industry. And I think a couple things aren't happening if fewer students of color are pursuing undergraduate and graduate level arts degrees, there will be fewer folks in the pool to populate some of those jobs. And even in jobs that you might not think would benefit from diverse perspectives, they all can, so some decisions are repeated, mistakes are repeated by not having as diverse a pool of applicants to choose from. But I think it also starts, with outreach to in the perspective of higher education, outreach to high schools, and perhaps maybe even depending on where you are, middle schools, so that you can start developing a pipeline of students to attend your institutions on a graduate level, outreach to undergraduate institutions in different ways. And outreach could look like a lot of different things to ensure a pipeline. But also, like, for example, one thing we do at Brooklyn College is, imagining what is an MFA or BFA students, what's their life like afterwards. Of course, in the city, one of the hardest things to do is that get a studio. So we try to develop professional kind of residency opportunities for students with nonprofit arts organizations in Brooklyn and in New York and beyond, where they might get a studio for 3 months or 6 months after they graduate. Not every student can get one, but a small percentage of our students are able to compete for those positions, and that it kind of kickstarts their career in different ways. So we're trying to look for more of those partnerships and opportunities. Some of them cost a lot, some of them cost very little, some of them could be sort of more like internship kind of situations where students can get some credit and perhaps even also get paid to do internships. I take advantage of the federal work study program because we don't have a lot of funding at our college for internships. So through the federal work study program, we can have I can have like creative research or studio-based positions for students who qualify after they go through the gauntlet of qualifying for federal aid. If they do in fact get it, there could be some interesting positions in studio art or art history for them through our institution. But it's still not enough. There needs to be more, and there needs to be different kind of approaches.
I think it makes me think of perhaps some of the mirroring that's happening, and like when I deal with museums or institutions for my professional work, and then I deal with my school. What happens is I think in these institutions, they're good people. I feel like my bosses aren't horrible people. I don't think I'd be there if I thought they were horrible people, but still they have to make like these institutional choices sometimes that make me question my involvement. So that's what I see is like this inequity is being mirrored, because it's not necessarily the individuals who are in control or who are horrible people. Rather, I think the institutions function a very particular way of working with inequity. I mean, it's this capitalist structure. I think if there was equity, I think we'd be living in a different environment. And so it's like trying to figure out how to suss it out. For example, I think communication is really important. One of the things that most faculty do when they negotiate their way into a position is they work out a deal. And in a private institution, that folder is closed and that information is private. So you don't know who's making what. So it's a breeding ground for inequity, right? Likewise, if a museum wants to purchase, the Cleveland Institute or somebody wants to purchase a work from me, one of the hard things for me to know is the value in comparison with my colleagues, and because it's hard for us to communicate about value and money. I think this silence benefits institutions and breeds inequality, and it makes me think and question, how can I be within the institution and be an agent for change? And I think that's what I struggle with. Well, I'm a part of the system, and as much as I'm pointing the finger at other people saying, well, yeah, if they could help change this system, but the truth is there's weight on all of our shoulders and trying to, to be in a position where we can kind of at least communicate better about maybe our circumstances with our colleagues. And that's a hard thing to do, is to share how much we make. But that is the beginning of a conversation that really could open things up and could shed light on inequality. Yeah, so I guess that's my my spiel for the moment. I just think that these institutions are bad. The people are generally good, and so how do we shift the institution? That's the question.
Thank you for that, because I think a lot of the things that both of you really touched on some really valuable points in thinking about how, you know, how do we diversify that pool of applicants, and how do you start the process earlier. And I know there's a lot of after we're done this, I definitely want to, you know, address some of the things that are talked about in the chat. But yeah, absolutely. It is, yeah, I can relate to that too as well. Sometimes you're like, this is a really questionable decision that was made, or this is a strange situation, or that this is something that happened, and how you deal with that, and be under the same umbrella with that institution, or just kind of understanding that kind of complexity in the dynamics of that. And definitely the thing that I find really what important is thinking about how does that ultimately affect, going back to talking about how diverse that candidate pool is going to be. You know what I mean? If you have to navigate these structures within an institution, how do you bring that, you know, how hard is that to navigate? And, you know, does that have a lot of effect on who ends up being in those pools, who are there to get selected from you?
Absolutely right, Marcus. I'll just explain a little bit about what I did at you know, for the last, I don't know, 10, 12 years at SAIC. Is I had the opportunity for a course release, for one less course in my load, to talk to colleagues about working at SAIC, you know, which on one hand, it's like, I love it, but on the other hand, it's like, boy, I'm really exploring my network of people, people who believe in me, and then I'm convincing them that SAIC might be a right place. Now, there's a little window in which I can do this that there's not going to be a problem. For example, if there's a pool, there's a search for visual and critical studies, I can invite whoever I want to before the deadline. But after that, I mean, it becomes more difficult for me to talk about race, to talk about, you know, how a department, you know, needs could be factored into the search. So what we do is we try to put as many candidates in the pool that a department may seem as appropriate. You know, like, for example, if I might go out and recruit for a particular position, but there's going to be certain people that may, how should you say, it may be important for us to, like, be able to give them an opportunity to ask questions before they interview, and that's okay before the deadline. But after the deadline, then we can't, you know, then I think it would be a breach for me to talk to them about, you know, issues of race in relationship to the school, and relationship to that search. It could blow the whole search. So I think there's a period of time before, you know, that deadline, before that search, when we're trying to entice candidates, that we really go all out and we try to make that pool as interesting as possible by letting people know that we're going to personally invite them to apply. And I think most of you probably have done variations of that, but I think we're doing this more and more. Yeah, and I think it's I think probably the wave of the future is, like, we're inviting people that we need to apply, and we're aggressively pursuing them. Yeah.
That's interesting. Thank you for that. Our very next, the last real question is something that Itzo brought up on the last question, is what changes do you think would nurture more arts education opportunities for Black artists and other disadvantaged groups? Itzo, just to recap, Itzo was talking about more outreach in the high school and in the middle school area, and how that could potentially, you know, nurture more arts education. And as I don't know if this is this, I don't have, that's not exactly in this study that I shared, but arts education in general is not across the board equitable in every state. And it's not a thing that's, me personally, I didn't have my first art class until I was in 7th grade. So that was a thing for me. Like I didn't have anything. And then as soon as I got out of the school I was in, I got in all kind of different art forms. So I just wanted to ask that again, even though I know Eto covered some of that, just art education opportunities in general, like what things do you see become in the future? Also, the thing you just talked about, Jefferson, about the candidates, you know, about going out into the community and like finding different candidates to apply for different positions is also a thing that I feel like is a thing that can help create more equitable opportunities and more diversity within an institution. But do you have any other thoughts about that, just as a general, I guess a general plan of attack, almost to say?
I think one thing, I mean, there's a lot, you know, funding is always going to be an issue for everyone, you know, free art education, you know. But I think one thing that pops in my mind is safety. I think that we have to ensure that our campuses are safe and welcoming for Black students, brown students, trans students. I mean, the list goes on, right? You know, and that goes for, you know, letting them know that if they need escorts in the evening, or that, you know, the infrastructure, the light and the temperature and everything is safe. You know, the sculpture studios are safe to work in, and they won't be health hazards later on. That faculty are trained to, you know, be aware of addressing people with different pronouns and things of that nature. I mean, there's a lot, you know, so it goes back again to, you know, understanding your community, understanding maybe there's particular crisis or tension or critical issues. I know here in New York, and we're still experiencing a lot of hate and violence against people of Asian backgrounds, you know, so some of our students don't want to come to classes at night, you know, or, you know, they're apprehensive about taking the train, you know, and things of that nature. So we have to be aware, you know, of what's happening within our communities and respond in an agile way. You know, we don't have a lot of funding, but we have to find a way in my particular institution, but we have to be agile and quick in our response to let people know, okay, we're aware of this, you know, these are some stuff steps we can take now to help, or to you know, be responsible and responsive to your needs, and also think about how does that affect the longer term plans of the institution.
So Marcus, when you ask the question, are you talking in particular about, you know, needs for students or needs for faculty?
I guess I'm talking about like arts education opportunities for Black students and other groups where it's to me, from what I'm understanding, like I guess from the study, I've read a few more studies, and I'm sure y'all have read a little bit about, you know, HBCUs with the, you know, providing, like having, you know, maybe trying to revitalize their art education programs, and that had to do with a lot of actors and successful people in the entertainment industry going, hey, like, what happened to this program that y'all don't fund anymore? And so I think I'm just talking about in general, like art education opportunities, maybe in the undergraduate level, like, are there good pathways for students to go to school, even if it's not at a very expensive art institution, or what do you think would nurture more of that kind of some opportunities for young people for that?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because I think one of the big things, and I think many people here can understand, is I will go somewhere and I'll run into an incredible student and they feel that they have to go to my school. or that they have to go to a particular kind of school. And I have to almost stop, and it's like, I went to a state school that was rated pretty low, but I got a lot of attention, and I had some of the best colleagues, some of who are here today. And I'm like, how much do you pay for? How much is that worth? To be at a state school and you're in classes with people that you get along with. So it's trying to say, okay, well, what is the value? Is the value going to a school with a great name and a great reputation, or is the value, being somewhere, like Ida was saying, in which an environment has been established to nurture you. And for me, there was people there who looked out for me and made sure I was, my needs were met. So I think that's probably one of the most important things, is trying to set up a safe environment, so that when we're bringing these students in, when we're bringing faculty in, we're not experimenting with these new ideas and theories with our students and our faculty, that somehow we've established a method in which we know that we're going to give support to these individuals. And I was talking, I think some of people might have heard of RISD's cohort, or I think it was, what would they call it, a cluster hire. And I was talking to one of the faculty members who was brought in that cluster, and he's like, don't call it a cluster anymore. There's no such thing as a good cluster. Clusters are all bad. And it was fascinating, because I thought this was great. I mean, the idea of coming in with 10 people of color, I mean, that's something would be exciting about that. And he's like, no, it's actually the way they even organized the language in which they brought us in was kind of toxic, and we're still dealing with it right now. So sometimes, I mean, the illusion is that, something is really shiny and good, but ultimately, I think we have to think about what these individuals need to be able to give support, not necessarily to create the allure to seem like we're doing the right thing, or that we're bringing in a whole bunch of people, but we haven't established a system in which they're cared for, and which I think Ito brought up really masterfully.
I thought that, I think that's really important, is having a support structure. And my students right now, the high school, I teach at a high school arts conservatory, and it is, it may be, they may get college credits for the classes, but the thing that's super valuable, I try to pass on to them, as I go, if you don't get into this art school, you don't go to this school, it's okay, because at the end of the day, you need to go where you're going to get it paid for, and where you're going to get the most support for what you need to get. And I think sometimes it's hard for students to hear, but I find more and more now, I mean, maybe I don't remember being this smart when I was their age, but maybe they now are kind of going, and I find this a lot with a lot of my students from poor backgrounds as far as economically. They're just kind of like, no, I'm going to go here because I don't have to pay anything for it. And yes, I want to get out of my parents' house or whatever, and I'll do that. But I'm going to go here. Everything's taken care of. I'd rather do that. And I think that's what I think the bigger schools need to look at, is like, think about what can you help some of those students who may have a lot of talent, but they're not going to build. That just doesn't seem like a very smart investment. And where the value is, I think what you just said is very important. It's like that's priceless, having a system, a community that supports you. I think it sounds like you both are trying to do a lot within your institution to make sure that safe environment is like there, so that people can thrive in the community they're in. So thank you very much for that. Jefferson?
Yeah, I was wondering about other folks. Are we going to open up the conversation, Marcus, or is it?
Yeah. That's actually exactly where I was going. So right now, I just thought I'm going to actually turn it over to Nicole to go ahead and take some of the audience questions. there's a lot. I've been trying to keep up with the chat, or at least look like as people are mentioning or asking questions. So I don't know if you want to start there.
Yeah. So Patricia had put in a question, and Patricia, do you feel like Eto answered your question throughout the discussion? If not, we can certainly address it. But I know that the topic was kind of touched upon, perhaps. So you can put that answer in the chat for me, or you can unmute. And if not, I'll move on. I'll open up to the audience to unmute or put anything in the chat. Just have a few minutes left, so I'd like to get a question in.
Nicole, I'll go.
Thanks, Susanna. Go ahead.
I think there's a lot of commonality in all of the folks here and in what we're hearing. A lot of deep-seated frustration and a lot of determination to keep at it that we all share. Including Dr. Jones, who I guess we didn't get today. The 4 people who are speaking for and to us are some of the most accomplished, recognized, and highly decorated in the practice, doing stunning and innovative work. I spent time mostly on Instagram looking at all 4 of our speakers, these artists and educators, life records. It's astonishing. And I regret to say that it brings up some pretty strong feelings for me, that you really have to do all that to be able to be consulted about these matters, to raise up a voice and have it listened to have your experience, condensed into fire through creative work, have an impact. I don't have a primary cultural hearth. I'm welcome at all of them because I have that kind of background. And the only thing that I was ever able to do as an educator was to make sure that once I was in the studio classroom with the student, that everybody's voice was respected. And I saw so clearly that given the motive, method, and opportunity, that students from every form of biological, cultural origin, every age, every circumstance would follow that. It gave me a confidence that carried me as a part-time adjunct, unmedically insured, running the sculpture department faculty member for almost 20 years, the energy that I needed and the satisfaction I still cherish. But I think that we're sort of in a boat and we're trying to figure out how to work a boat when it's not in the water.
Thanks, Susanna. Any follow-up, Marcus, Jefferson, or Eto that you want to add to that?
Thank you, Susanna, for your thoughts. Really appreciate that.
Yes.
I want to say thank you so much to Marcus, Jefferson, and Eto for your time and your insight. That was just wonderful to hear, and we really appreciate you spending some time with